can remember playing the We Happy Few early access build way back when it first came out, and people at the time were acting like it was some kind of amazing new game, with it having this really weird amount of hype. And then I played it, and all I got was a pretty generic first-person open world survival game, with a 1960s England aesthetic and the kind of story that felt like something out of a John Pertwee Doctor Who episode. Well, cut to 2018 and We Happy Few has finally left early access and been fully released. Developed by Compulsion Games and published by one of the industry's favourite punching bags, Gearbox Software. It's still got that 1960s England aesthetic, and it still feels like the kind of story from a Doctor Who episode. But what's most shocking is that it's actually a lot more playable now, and I'm surprised at just how much I actually enjoyed it, despite what I've been reading about it.
Well, why didn't you see that before?
So little has been changed from the setup. Playing as one of 3 characters, the game is set in a retrofuturistic, the best kind of futuristic, part of 1960s England called Wellington Wells, where citizens live in poverty or in utopic bliss, buzzed out of their brains on a drug called joy.
Oh my lord. He's a downer. Call security. We've got a downer.
Each area of Wellington Wells forms a different part of society, so in the slummy areas known as the Garden District, citizens wear torn and filthy rags for clothes.
At least there are flowers out here.
Whilst in the swanky Parade District, people walk around wearing trendy designer clothes. And a big theme of the game is conforming and trying to fit in and remain anonymous. A couple of hours into the game and joy starts to become a more prominent mechanic, and you can't walk for 5 seconds without bumping into a joy dispenser, just with the downside of taking it to potentially ODing if you take too much. Though there's only a couple of instances when you have to take it to progress, otherwise you can find a drug that simulates the symptoms without the downsides. Those who don't take the drug are referred to as downers and promptly outcast and left to fend for themselves in the outskirts of Wellington Wells in the aforementioned garden districts. Now on that note, the map itself is pretty open-ended, and what's kind of great about this game is the way that it lets you proceed through it. So you've got like the main missions, you know, the ones that move the story along, and these obviously have to be finished to progress. The side missions, however, are entirely left up to the player, and they're often discovered by simply exploring the map as much as possible.
That doesn't sound ominous at all.
Some of these are really strange too, like I did this one where I had to sneak into a creepy house full of tea-drinking old ladies, and then I just came across this weird demonic shrine. Then there's another one where I'm trying to help this guy get laid.
We owe it all to you.
Gameplay is broken down into either stealth or combat, with neither of these being all that refined, but I think the stealth is probably the lesser of two evils. With both styles, you're given the option of a lethal or a non-lethal approach, though I don't really see what the ramifications are if you pick one over the other, outside of it just being the player's choice, like if you're going for some kind of pacifist run or something. Throwable items can be used as well, like you've got a basic grenade which just kind of blows up, or a shock grenade which has a pretty big area of effect, and can knock out any poor sod unlucky enough to be stuck near it. Or how about something like the vomit bomb that does what it sounds like, causing enemies in the vicinity to start violently throwing up. Now all of these items can also be crafted as long as you've got the recipe, and like a lot of these open world survival games, We Happy Few lets you become this kind of kleptomaniac asshole, stealing everything that isn't bolted down. From pieces of metal, screws, bolts, rocks, empty bottles, you name it, you can pick it up and stash it away, and it's always got some kind of purpose. You've got to contend with hunger, thirst, and tiredness, but what's cool here is that not monitoring these won't kill you. Instead, it just gives you a slight penalty to things like your stamina, the damage you can do, and that kind of stuff. And I think it's a good way of making it less about having to constantly look for water and food sources, and more of a slight detriment to the player's stats, which makes it feel like less of a chore, but still keeps that survival aspect. I did like too that a lot of the crafting in this game doesn't feel all that grindy. At least in the sense of it not being about needing to have 15 or 20 of something to craft an item. Like you only ever need like 2 or 3 of something. And there's only like a couple of times when I had to go searching for components. You can create lockpicks from bobby pins to get through locked doors. You can create jimmy bars with metal scraps to pry open phone boxes for loose change. You can break into safes, you can hack keycard readers, or you can disarm or even turn hazardous traps against NPCs. It reminds me a lot of Bioshock in a way that you can approach the game's environment from a lot of different perspectives and interact with things in a pretty dynamic way. Just don't expect people to ignore you if you start fucking around. The thing is though, you don't actually ever have to craft something to progress, outside of a couple of key moments. I mean, if you need to get through a locked door, you can hack it, but you'll also find the keycard nearby, or maybe even a vent you can sneak through. Every item or weapon you're able to craft can also be found in the game world if you look hard enough. I mean, I crafted some of the unique weapons out of curiosity, but everything else I just found by playing the game. Stealth is pretty much everything we've come to expect from a game that has stealth kind of thrown in as an afterthought, and it's pretty much the bare minimum required to pull a stealth system off. So, for starters, you press crouch, which somehow makes you more difficult to spot. You can see an NPC's footsteps through solid objects as long as they're close enough, and then early on you can unlock the ability to choke people out from behind, picking their body up straight away to dump it out of sight. It's also got those magical bushes you can hide in, which somehow makes you totally invisible unless someone happens to bump into you. And you can even throw bottles to distract enemies. I mean, it's textbook stuff and it mostly works. Now, I don't really have an issue with this stealth, to be honest. In fact, sometimes it works pretty well. It's just that a lot of the time it feels really inconsistent. Pathfinding for the enemies, for instance, is highly randomized at times. Like, you'll see NPCs walking around and then suddenly they just do a kind of a 90-degree turn and they'll spot you instantly. Like right there, look, that guy was just about to turn around and spot me for no reason. When you are detected, for some reason, everyone that sees you at this point just goes hostile and starts chasing you. Even if you run out of that area, everyone who sees you while you're still in this hostile state is going to give chase. Now look, maybe this is supposed to make sense from the perspective of the game world, like being in this hive mind society or whatever, but from the viewpoint of those NPCs, they have no idea or context to why I'm being chased. For them to suddenly start coming after me with a shovel or a cricket bat, it just doesn't make sense. There's an abundance of hiding spots in the city where you can easily lose your pursuers, but these are pretty rare in the countryside, and often you just have to keep running until they give up chase. Combat either, look, it ain't all that great, it's just either hit, block, or heavy attack. You have bugger all health in this game unless you've invested some skill points into it, so combat can be really punishing if you take too many hits, making it even less enjoyable. Speaking of skill points, the way this works is that when you complete side or main missions, you usually get like 3 or 5 skill points depending on how difficult the mission is, and then you're free to spend them on upgrading your character. Now, We Happy For You does have the expected ones like increased health points, but it also has some pretty nifty ones that fit in well with the theme of the game. Like I've said, a big aspect of your immersion within this brainwashed society is blending in, so if you do weird shit like sprinting around, crouching, stealing, people are going to take notice and eventually turn hostile. And one of the skills you can unlock for Arthur is the ability where people will turn a blind eye to this, ignoring you entirely. Likewise, at nighttime in the village, the streets are patrolled by bobbies. These are tall thugs that chase after you on sight and beat the living piss out of you. But again, you can eventually unlock an ability that lets you move around at night undisturbed.
Lovely weather.
Right as rain, right as rain.
Now look, it's not mandatory, but it's a good upgrade if you don't feel like playing by the rules and don't like the feeling of being constrained and forced to act a certain way, like, real life. It's just a bit more unique and enjoyable to see than the cookie cutter upgrades, like, you know what I mean? 10% more damage or 20% more stamina. Who gives a shit? Honestly though, outside of the stealth upgrades, I just didn't find that the combat upgrades was really having all that much of an effect on how well I did. Like, I still seem to take the same amount of damage from hits. Bobbies, for instance, just do massive damage, and I don't think I once got that perfect block move to work. Either way, look, the combat's just kinda crappy. Speaking of crappy, that's a good way to describe how this thing runs. Even on my 1080, i7 and 16GB of RAM, it just stutters along all the time. When you're running around quickly, it can chug along so bad that it almost makes it unplayable. Not literally unplayable, just like semi-unplayable. It's not really a good enough looking game for it to justify performing this poorly. I mean, it's understandable given how huge the map is, but it's not really justifiable. It was a lot like this too during the early access build, and it's a shame that it hasn't really been all that improved. It sucks. Other than that, you can expect the kind of bugs and glitches you'd get in a game of this scale. Like, I had a couple of quests that got broken and I could never complete them. Like, the NPC I'd need to chat to just didn't show up. And sometimes after I'd finished a quest, it still showed up in my quest log and on the map. Is it to the scale and severity of what other people are saying? I mean, look, maybe it is. Me personally, I didn't have anything game-breaking in my playthrough. But it seems a lot of the complaints I've read are people saying it's literally broken or it's literally unplayable. You know, the kind of people who don't know what the word literally actually means? To me, it's no more broken than an Elder Scrolls or a Fallout game is upon release. So look, make that what you will. There are weird things I noticed though, like you can bribe a bobby to get them drunk, but then they'll just be drunk for the remainder of the game, no matter how many days passed. People won't allow you into certain areas if you're not wearing the right clothes, but you can literally change clothes right in front of them and they don't bat an eyelid. Also, I think it's weird how you can't do a stealth takedown on the old ladies, you know what I mean? The one NPC that should be the easiest to sneak up on and knock out. I feel like there really is a lot going on with this game though, in the way you can approach it, and I think people who just kind of shrug it off as another survival game are missing out on something really unique and creative. Is it perfect? No. But it does most of the things right most of the time, and the premise and story I found to be genuinely intriguing. helped along by some good voice acting, which I thought made the characters all engaging and, likeable.
Dizzy, why don't we drink some tea? Oh, and how about a nice cold bath?
I mean, how many games can you say are set in this bizarre Orwellian 1960s England, requiring the player to ingest a psychedelic drug in between avoiding murderous bobbies, and an enemy later in the game that can only be described as a giant vacuuming teapot? My first playthrough just as Arthur took me around 15 hours, and I was moving pretty damn quickly just so I could finish it and see the ending. So if you spend all the time completing side quests, it could easily be upwards of 20 hours. When you finish a character's storyline, that's it. Game over, you lose, good day sir. But the game does tell you beforehand when you're passing the point of no return in case you want a manual save and go back and do all the stuff you've missed, which I plan to do. Then after that, like I said, there's 2 more campaigns to play through, each with their own unique storylines, upgrade trees and unique abilities. I mean, that's a hell of a lot of content. Honestly, look, the negative things you're going to hear about this game are probably true, but I really don't think it's as bad as people are making it out to be. If the premise is interesting to you and you can put up with a few shoddy mechanics here and there, that, hey, fingers crossed, might even be patched and fixed, well, I'd say We Happy Few is definitely worth checking out. And look, you know what? It's still better than Hunt Down the Freeman.
Well, I'm afraid we've come to the end of our time. Tune in tomorrow for another Etiquette Minute with Jack Worthing. That's me.